Hey everyone, what's going on? It's 1 p.m. Central Standard Time on April 16th, 2020. So looks like they're still pushing the lockdown, but people are pushing back. The state of Michigan has a group that's about 300,000 strong that are pushing back pretty hard against this Governor Whitmer, who, not to be unkind, but is extraordinarily unlady looking. And, un-Anglo-Saxon looking Whitmer. Anyways, so we're going to see how that all develops. I hope everybody is doing what you can and what is wise to do in these times, because they are waging war. It really is war. All right, so just the other day, I finally completed this list that I've been working on for a while now. This is it's something that was just a necessity from having to do with the book. And there was a chapter where I have to actually provide an answer to a problem. It's a geographical problem. And as I got a little further into it, I realized that there are so many places that may have overlapping names, or actually be called something in one place and called something else in another place. And that there are places that they share borders, whether it's intertribal or tribes sharing borders with other peoples. Excuse me. And because of that, and because of how prolific it all is, there's so much to it that I had to step back from continuing work on the book and actually create this list. Now, this isn't actually the finished draft. The finished draft actually has to be in the form of a table, and it's actually going to have hyperlinks directly to Strong's entries, and it will also have, whatever they're called. Let's see. Oh, I'm sorry. Cross-references within the document. So I'm hoping that's actually going to be a very, very useful document for anybody who wants to do some work on the geography of the actual land itself and where this actually took place. So I'm relatively sure that I might have, just because of the reality of human error, missed a few entries along the way. You're talking about almost 9,000 entries in Strong's between so-called Hebrew and what they claim is Chaldean, the Aramee. Which, I mean, it's all presented with Hebrew character anyways, so that whole language and those portions of the Bible in that language are still kind of a mystery. But I did include those too. If there was a city or a nation that had locations and geographical landmarks within them, I did include them also in this document. This document is formatted in 2 columns. And all of the entries are in an 11-point font, Obri Beta 3. If it was a 11-point font, even in Liberation Serif, you would still get about the same amount of entries per line. The average is, even with a few spaces in there, the average is just over 50 entries per column on a page. Okay, just giving you some ideas of the extent of it. And now I also had a section that takes up, I'm not even down to it. Let's see. So, yeah, not even a page and a half. It's unknown or unproven locations. A lot of them, I have notes on every entry. A lot of them possibly in Judah, a lot of them possibly in Menashe, Manasseh, Aparim, Ephraim, Reuben, Issachar, and so forth. There, of course, are also fields here with multiple entries for Adum, Edom, Aram, which the Bible insists on rendering Syria most of the time, Asher, Assyria, Hamat or Hamath, and places that were, say, listed for Canaan, that you may not see down the road. Let's just say like the cities of the plain, Sodom, Gomorrah, Tzebiim or Zeboim, and so on and so forth. Also, some locations that were classified as being in the Lebanon, which is a large, heavily wooded area adjoining the Parat or Euphrates. There's the Midbar or the wilderness, where Yisrael traveled between Mitzrayim and Canaan. There are many, many entries for Moab, and Mitzrayim. Odin or Eden. There are also entries for that, because that also appears to be not so far away from the land of Canaan. So I just want to point out a few things that I found out in completing this document. Maybe some anomalous things as well. One thing that I found really interesting, and this has a lot to do with, for instance, the current population of Palestine/Israel today, and some things that I've said about how much that they have had to employ the most cutting edge hydrological features, technology, techniques. I mean, back in the early part of the 20th century, they hired just about every cutting edge, and have since. The issues of fresh water over in this region haven't diminished even remotely. And they've got, just in the area of the occupied territories in Palestine proper, they claim about 8 million people. And they are having to do some really, really serious cutting-edge techniques in delivering fresh water to everyone. Keeping in mind things like that the so-called Sea of Galilee is heavily brackish itself. Of course, the Dead Sea is undrinkable. Nothing lives there even. And then you have the Mediterranean saline as well, and you don't have a lot of fresh water coming from anywhere. This is why, before they decided to heavily populate this area, let's say when the Mufti from Palestine met with Hitler in the 30s, the total population of the territories that comprised Iraq, Syria, Transjordan, and Palestine, grand total population of all of those areas put together was under 2 million. I'll let that sink in. Under 2 million for all that. And that's because, again, those Arabs and Bedouins and whatnot, they would They would happily have had far bigger families. They would happily have far more offspring. They would happily have far more wives if they were able to sustain them. Now, with a lot of this oil money that's come over there, they can more readily sustain larger populations. They have this area of the world, it's not just Palestine, but all those areas that I mentioned, Mesopotamia and the Levant in general, the Middle East, the most, again, cutting-edge technologies have been employed to get fresh water to them. It is the leading cause of strife and one of the leading issues that all of these countries have to cope with. And again, coming back to the fact that there is a claimed population of 8 million total in the occupied territories in Palestine proper, okay? Now, I'm just going to go to what Wikipedia has listed as far as cities. The amount of cities that they have listed for Palestine, what is still ostensibly theirs, it's about 30-something cities listed, okay? And they give populations for them and whatnot, and, you know, no, that doesn't include maybe like small hole-in-the-wall villages and whatnot, but you can see, you know, different populations of these cities and whatnot. About 30-something, actually, okay? And then when you look on the list of cities in the occupied territories that is called Israel, they've got about 70-something listed, okay, with populations. So you figure a bit over 100, okay? All right, so keep that in mind. Between those and with all of the cutting-edge water technology, with all of the cutting-edge planting and irrigation technology that money could buy, and they did have to buy this heavily through the nose to make this kind of stuff happen, to make the deserts bloom, if you buy that. Now, let's take a look at what I've found here. Now, I could just jump right to the area that's just Judah, where Judah's listed. Judah. Okay, so what I've got here is I have two complete pages with the 2 columns, 11-point font, very few spaces, which makes it over 50 entries per column. A little bit over 2 pages and maybe about 20 entries besides. So figure 224 plus those extra 15, 20 entries. Just Judah, somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 some entries. Now, there are entries in here that are doubled up because there were some areas where there would be things listed twice, you know, that I haven't had time yet to weed out. So, I mean, let's take 20% away from that, okay? We still have somewhere pushing 200, at least over 150 locations. Even if we had just over 100, and now that's being super generous to the claimed model, that would still, just in the territory of Judah. This is right after the time of the conquest with Joshua and all, okay? Judah alone would have more cities listed than what we have listed for Palestine and the occupied territories. Now, some people could say, well, there are a lot of really small towns that aren't accounted for and stuff. Today, between Palestine and the occupied territories. But then I would answer and say there are also, in a number of these cities listed for the tribes just in the book of Joshua. Because if you pay attention, it will typically give these clusters of cities, and then it'll usually say, along with their words are used like Benutia, or sometimes Hatzrut, or let's see, there's I think it's, what is it, Megaresh or Kiritim. There's a lot of different words describing cities, suburbs, daughter towns, things like that for a lot of these places also, and those are named, are not named or counted. So you don't know how many of those there are for so many of these places. Again, just the listings in Judah alone exceeds the listing of cities between Palestine and the occupied territories of today. Now consider something too. And remember, a lot of those are shared with Shemun or Simeon, because their territory was basically within Judah's, and it bordered around the area of Edom and Teman, which was one of the sons of Edom. But see, they were two tribes that actually went and took their territory themselves. They just kind of took it upon themselves to go and take territory of their own accord, and pretty much on their own, and so they gained so much. Judah gained a lot. However, there was still, besides Judah and Simeon, and then you had Reuben and Gad and half of Manasseh. So 4.5 tribes. You still had about 9 tribes to account for that needed a territory that would be as described in Joshua. There were a number of representatives from every tribe that was left who went all through the land and conducted surveys. And when they had finished conducting their surveys, they divided what land there was between what tribes were left according to what seemed quite fair. And then they basically drew lots for the territories. Okay? And then, each one would get a lot based on what they drew. Now, if I were to go back to Joshua 18, the allotment of the remaining land, this was after they did the survey and figured up what are all fair portions for the 9 tribes left. So in chapters 16 and 17, it describes the portion given to Joseph, so Manasseh and Ephraim. And then starting in 18, the first few verses are the description of Simeon's land within Judah and the cities that Simeon inherited. Not all of them being border cities that they shared with Judah, a number of them being their own cities. A number of those cities would be bordered on either Moab or Edom. Okay? So, let's see. So besides for... Oh, 1 second. All right. 17 we have, right, Manasseh. 18 we have Benjamin. And let's see. Right. Okay. Sorry. 18 Benjamin, and then 19 Simeon, Zebulun, Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, Dan. Okay. So what's interesting is if they divided these areas up according to what seemed to be very fair for what land was left and what tribes were left. Interesting thing to consider is that when I did this list, the amount of places that came up for Benjamin, and he was one of the tribes that had to basically draw straws, roll the dice for what areas that all the representatives of the tribe, so they were dividing these up and allotting them as to what would seem fair, depending on what they might or might not get. They were trying to be as fair as possible when they did this. Even so, let's see. Benjamin ends up with, I've got 1 column, 2 columns, just Benjamin. I've got about 2 columns of just Benjamin. So that would, let's see, that would equal, we'll say, close to 100 places. Just Benjamin. I had a map up. Let me go to Tools here in eSword and pull up my graphics viewer. This is a good map, I suppose. Minus it a little bit. This is definitely representative of a lot of maps that have been produced of Palestine as the Holy Land. Doesn't really show the tribes. Let's see, that's historical. Go to, I just want to get a map up that actually is, that one's a little clunky. That shows the tribes. I have a number in other books and whatnot. I just really didn't feel like opening them up. Okay, this one's not bad. All right, this one's the Rand McNally. They've published a lot of books with the tribes and all that. Okay, so none of these tend to agree. You go from atlas to atlas to atlas. They don't really agree, but for the most part, a lot of them have to agree to a point anyways, okay? Not exactly, but they have restrictions because of the place that they're working within. Pretty much, typically, no matter who the map maker is, Benjamin still ends up with this little small territory. It's because that's the way they have to do it when they apply the descriptions to Palestine. Now remember, Benjamin is pushing 100 locations. And here's what I want you to consider. Not all of the locations in all of the tribes are named, for one thing. And if we're going to be fair, and they surveyed all of this out fairly, it would seem that Benjamin would be very unfair, as well as Zebulun up here. And then you can see a lot of them, they have to make the half tribe of Manasseh on the other side of the Jordan and Sea of Galilee that they've assigned over in that land. They have to make the half tribe of Manasseh gigantic. So none of it's really working out too good according to their maps. The other thing is, because of the way that they have to assign allotted territories and places for different peoples, you're pretty much always going to see, don't think of the what they've convinced everyone Israel is today, where it runs that chain of mountains to the south of the Dead Sea that they say was Mount Seir and Edom, all the way down to the Gulf of Aqaba, that they say is Yam Suf, or the Red Sea. No, most of them have to be consistent. They usually have to run the border just in a swooping southwestern pattern, then over towards the Mediterranean. And they usually have to get pretty fancy to try to figure out how to explain away the fact that they don't have the right border landmarks. For instance, the Shire River, which it appears that the Philistine cities were lined up along that river as opposed to lined up along the coast of the Mediterranean, which actually makes sense. One real problem is that Judah alone shares about 7 locations with Moab alone. And not only Moab, but see if I can go forward. Of course, Edom, a number of locations, Judah and Simeon with Edom. Judah also shares locations, strangely enough, with tribes on the other side of the Jordan. In some cases would have to be on the other side of the Dead Sea if this took place in Palestine, like Reuben and Gad. In fact, there's a verse in which, there's a passage, it's in 1 Samuel. David had returned from a battle that he was going to participate. Him and his men were going to participate in, supposedly on the Philistine side. They wouldn't let him. Because they were right. They said they wouldn't let him because they were worried that when the battle would start, he would actually be fighting for Judah or Israel instead of them. And I agree, because he wouldn't attack Judah. He never did. He would attack the enemies of Judah and Israel, and then he would lie to the king of Gath and tell him that he was attacking villages of Judah. Now, when they got back to the city that they were given by this king Achish, when they got back there, Ziklag, they found that the Omlaki or Amalekites had raided their village, had taken their women, and taken a lot of belongings. They followed them and they caught up with them. And when they defeated them, they had this huge amount of spoil that David sent as gifts to his friends and family in Judah. One of the locations that they sent that spoil to was Or. And for anybody who has read and paid attention to the passages, for instance, in Numbers 21 forward, they would know that Or is a city on the Arnon. The Arnon, it is the city that borders the Arnon and has a sister city in the midst of the river. And they try to tell us that the Arnon is the modern-day Wadi Mujib, which is this big old canyon just about the middle of the Dead Sea. And they say that Or is quite a ways, about 8 miles to the east of the Dead Sea. He was sending gifts to his friends and his family. This actually explains why, for instance, in the book of Ruth, why when there was a famine in Judah, they headed to Moab, because they shared many locations with Moab. So it also explains why, when describing the southern border of Judah, it says from Yam Emelah, which they say is the Salt Sea, the border goes down southward and eastward. Though they minimize that passage, they make it sound like just from the eastern tip, not going eastward. But I believe that all the descriptions I've read actually prove that the territory of Judah went around Yam Emelah, and again could not be in Palestine. All right, so anyways, I got to wrap there. My wife's home. We got some things to do. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a taste of where this is all going and how things are shaping up. And then just, give you that bit of contrast between what they try to convince us is actually the land of the Bible and the real descriptions of the land of the Bible, which again don't harmonize. So remember, besides those over 200 locations just between Judah and Benjamin, we still have, if you want to count Manasseh and Ephraim as, two separate tribes, well, then we still have 11 tribes and all of those locations to account for. We have a heck of a lot of locations in Moab, and then so on and so forth. And I haven't even begun to scratch the surface on a lot of oddities of common locations, not only between tribes that really shouldn't be there, like, for instance, the fact that in Joshua it says that Naphtali impinged into Judah on the Jordan. Okay, so you check any map you want that they've made of the tribes and Bible lands overlaid on Palestine, and you tell me how that happens. Because I can tell you this, that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are 7 tribes that border on the Jordan. Reuben, Naphtali, Gad, Issachar, Ephraim, the half-tribe of Manasseh, and Benjamin. And it's really hard, when you think about it, to get Judah, and Judah, so 8, so to get Judah and Benjamin and Ephraim and Naphtali all on the Jordan. And I'm starting to think, nope, and Issachar. Think about how you make that work in that model. So with that, that's it for this little video. So everybody take care.